Well, thank you for having me. And what I'll do today, in the time that's allotted me, which is something less than the time I usually take, professors, even ex-professors, usually take about a half hour to clear their throats. And I think I have 1 hour to get all my remarks in. And I have a watch here to keep me honest. What I'll do today is speak on the most recent events in Gaza, which is why I suppose many of you are here today. Not just to speak on what happened, but why it happened. And I think, can you hear me up there in the back? Yeah, we're fine with the sound. So let's begin. Now, first of all, there's a small question of terminology that we have to get out of the way. Namely, what word do we use to describe what happened in Gaza between December 27th and January 17th? The facts are pretty straightforward and uncontroversial. Israel flew about 3,000 combat missions over Gaza. All the planes came back safely. None was damaged, let alone downed. Israel avoided any major engagements with Hamas in order to avoid any serious casualties. Therefore, there were a few limited clashes in Gaza during those 22 days. Israel did most of its fighting at night. It had special night equipment, fairly advanced technologically. Hamas was not able to resist that kind of night fighting. And so what you would expect to have happened actually did happen. Namely, the kill ratio was about 100 to 1. 13 Israelis were killed, 3 of them civilians. About 1,300 to 1,400 Gazans were killed. Between 1/4 and 1/3 were children. Between 300 and 400 were children. Well, the planes go in, and there's nothing to resist them. And if you engage in night fighting, and the other side can't fight, and you have a kill ratio of 100 to 1, by any reasonable dictionary definition, you're not talking about a war, because war at bare minimum means 2 sides fighting. And it was not 2 sides fighting. What you had here, by any reasonable definition, and not to be emotive or invoke passion, but simply to stick to what a dictionary would describe it as, what you had was a massacre or a slaughter or a bloodbath. For simplicity's sake or for consistency's sake, I'll just refer to it henceforth as the Gaza massacre. Israel officially justified the Gaza massacre by saying it was an act of self-defense against Hamas rocket attacks. That justification plainly lacks any credibility, because if Israel wanted to avert the Hamas rocket attacks, it would not have broken the ceasefire with Hamas that triggered the Hamas rocket attacks. It also had the option as late as December 21st to renew the ceasefire with Hamas, but didn't want to. And more broadly, it had the option already now for between 20 and 30 years of reaching a diplomatic settlement with the Palestinians, including recently Hamas, and that would have terminated all armed hostilities. Israel resisted that as well. I'll return to all of these points later in my remarks. Let me begin, however, by putting the Gaza massacre into the broader context of Israel's human rights record in the occupied Palestinian territories this past year. The main Israeli human rights organization monitoring what goes on in the occupied territories is called B'Tselem, the Israeli Information Center for Human Rights in the Occupied Territories. And a couple of weeks ago, it published its annual report on the West Bank and Gaza. It limited itself to January 1st to December 26th, leaving aside the massacre itself. So for that period, this past year, it looks something like this. According to B'Tselem, Israel killed 455 Palestinians in 2008, again leaving aside the massacre, killed 455 Palestinians, of whom at least 175 were civilians, non-combatants. On the Israeli side, 21 civilians and 10 combatants were killed. Thus, on the eve of what Israel called its war of self-defense, the ratio of total Palestinians to total Israelis killed was 15 Palestinians killed for every Israeli killed in 2008. If we limit ourselves strictly to non-combatants, the ratio was at minimum 9 Palestinians killed for each Israeli killed. If we now turn strictly to Gaza, B'Tselem reports that Israel killed at least 158 non-combatants in Gaza in 2008, while 7 Israeli civilians were killed. That is a ratio in Gaza to Israel of 20 Gazan non-combatants killed for every Israeli killed. Most of you know that Israel has loudly protested Hamas's detention of a single Israeli soldier whose name is fairly widely known now, Corporal Shalit. What's not as well known is while Hamas has detained one Israeli soldier, Israel, as of now, as we speak, continues to imprison approximately 10,000 Palestinians, of whom 548 were held in administrative detention without any charges or trial. 42 of those 548 have been held in administrative detention without charges or trial for the past 2 years and more. Beyond that, according to B'Tselem, this past year, Israel continued to tighten its sweeping restrictions in the freedom of movement of Palestinian residents in the West Bank. It continued to illegally expand the Jewish settlements, which now house about 500,000 illegal Jewish settlers. It continued to confiscate West Bank land, causing, in B'Tselem's words, serious harm to Palestinians who are no longer able to work their land and gain a livelihood from it. It continued, in B'Tselem's words, to prevent any possibility of development and construction in Palestinian communities. It continued to discriminatorily distribute water. The West Bank Palestinian population is about 9 times the size of the illegal Jewish settler population, but the water allocation of those Palestinians is less than, the total water allocation is less than the total water allocation for the 500,000 illegal Jewish settlers. And Israel continued construction of a wall that will steal approximately 12% of West Bank land, despite the ruling of the International Court of Justice, the highest judicial body in the world, that the wall was illegal and had to be dismantled.